in pretty profound ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely, beneath the surface.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Today we're doing a deep dive into the fascinating psychology of attitudes.
Right, those judgments we're constantly making about everything, really. People, places, news.
Everything. And what's really interesting, as you said, is they're not just random opinions, right?
Not at all, there's a whole science behind it.
Yeah.
Decades of psychological research give us a framework, a kind of architecture for understanding our attitudes.
Exactly. So the mission for this deep dive is, well, help you get under the hood of your own attitudes.
That makes sense.
We'll look at what they're made of, the components, how they're structured, the jobs they do for us psychologically, how researchers even try to measure them.
Which can be tricky.
Definitely. And crucially, how they connect or sometimes don't connect to what we actually do.
So listeners get a clear picture of their own preferences, maybe biases, and actions.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And we'll be pulling from some key academic work here, looking at attitude psychology and even how it plays out in places like work.
Sounds good. Foundational stuff.
All right, so let's start right at the beginning. Attitudes. What exactly is an attitude at its core?
Well, fundamentally, it's an evaluative judgment. Simple as that. Good or bad, like or dislike, favorable, unfair.
Like a quick mental tag.
Exactly. And the key thing is the scope. Pretty much anything we can form an opinion on, anything we can evaluate, can be what psychologists call an attitude object.
So my sudden urge for pizza, or getting annoyed when my Wi-Fi drops, or believing strongly in a certain policy, those are all attitudes.
Precisely. And to really grasp them, the multi-component model is super helpful. It breaks attitudes down into 3 bits.
Okay.
There's the affective component, that's feelings, emotions. Then the cognitive thoughts, beliefs, attributes you associate with the thing. And finally, the behavioral component, past actions or future intentions.
Affective, cognitive, behavioral.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's take an example. Buying a new phone. How would those 3 show up?
Okay, yeah. So the cognitive part might be you looking up specs, right?
Mm.
Processor speed, camera reviews, battery life,
Yeah.
the sort of factual stuff you weigh up.
Makes sense. The rational bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's dig into that first piece in the affective side. Feelings.
Mm-hmm.
How do emotions get tied to our attitudes?
Ah, that's where it gets interesting. Feelings get linked up in a few ways. One really cool mechanism is classical conditioning.
Like Pavlov's dogs.
Sort of, yeah, but with attitudes. There was this study, Krosnick and colleagues, back in '92. They showed people pictures of a stranger. But right before each picture, they flashed another image subliminally too fast to consciously see.
Okay.
For half the participants, these quick flashes were positive things, kittens, a wedding scene, For the other half, negative snakes, a shark attack.
Whoa. And did it stick?
It absolutely did. The people who got the positive flashes rated the stranger much more favorably afterwards.
Yeah.
They just liked them more.
Just from an unconscious flash of a kitten.
Yep. And it wasn't just general liking. They also rated the person's personality traits more positively, even thought they were more physically attractive. It shows how these hidden emotional links can subtly shape our attitudes, even towards something brand new.
That's kind of mind-blowing. So, okay, besides these unconscious nudges, what else ties feelings to attitudes?
Another big one is the mere exposure effect. Zayong talked about this back in '68.
Mere exposure. Just seeing something a lot.
Basically, yeah. Simply being exposed to something repeatedly can often increase how much we like it. Think about a song on the radio, maybe you didn't care for it at first listen.
But then it gets stuck in your head.
Exactly. And you find yourself kind of liking it. There's research showing this effect. Usually, the more we encounter something up to a point, the more positive our attitude becomes. Familiarity can sort of breed fondness.
Our brains just like what they know, I guess. Okay, let's shift then. What about the cognitive side, the thinking part? We mentioned phone specs.
Right. So the cognitive component is all about the information, the beliefs, the attributes we mentally connect to the attitude object. Often, our attitude comes from consciously thinking about the pros and cons.
Like making a list.
Pretty much. Going back to the phone, you read reviews, compare features, maybe weigh the price against the benefits. Your final attitude towards Model X versus Model Y is heavily based on those reasoned beliefs. Deliberate thinking plays a huge role.
Got it. So feelings creep in, we think things through. Now the behavioral component, this one feels a bit weird. How can what we do change what we think? Isn't it usually the other way around?
It can seem backward, yeah, but our behavior definitely feeds back into our attitudes. There's this great study by Brignol and Petty from 2003. They had people listen to an editorial through headphones.
Okay.
While listening, some were told to nod their head up and down, like agreeing, Others were told to shake their heads side to side, like disagreeing.
Just move their heads. That actually
Yeah.
did something.
It did, especially when the arguments in the editorial were strong. The people who were nodding ended up agreeing more with the editorial than the people who were shaking their heads.
Wow.
It suggests that the physical act, the behavior associated with agreement or disagreement, can itself influence our attitude, especially if the message has some substance. It's like our body language can nudge our beliefs.
Incredible. So doing can shape thinking, not just the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay, now, how are these attitudes actually organized in our heads? Is it just a simple line from love it to hate it?
That's a really good question. It gets into this debate about one-dimensional versus two-dimensional views of attitude structure.
Okay, explain.
The one-dimensional view is that simple line you mentioned. Positive and negative are just opposite ends of one scale. The more positive you are, the less negative, and vice versa.
Seems intuitive enough, but there's another take.
Yeah, the two-dimensional view. It suggests positive and negative feelings can actually exist on two separate scales, independently, meaning you could feel strongly positive and strongly negative about the same thing at the same time, or feel neutral on both. It allows for more complexity, like feeling conflicted.
Ah, so it's not always a trade-off. Interesting. Now, why do we even have attitudes? What's their purpose psychologically?
Good question. They serve several functions. Shavitz's work in 1990 highlights a key distinction: instrumental attitudes versus value-expressive attitudes.
Instrumental, like tools.
Kind of, yeah. Instrumental or utilitarian attitudes help us get rewards and avoid punishments. They serve our self-interest. We like things that are useful or beneficial, like an air conditioner on a hot day or a reliable car. It's the what's in it for me function.
Practical. Makes sense. And value expressive.
Those are more about who we are. They reflect our core values, our self-concept. Think about your stance on social issues or your taste in music or art. These attitudes aren't usually about tangible benefits. They're about expressing your identity, what you stand for.
Like aligning yourself with certain ideals.
Exactly. Your attitude towards, say, your country's flag is probably more about identity and values than any practical gain.
Right. So one helps us operate, the other helps us define ourselves. Now, sometimes we feel both ways about something, right? You see the good, but also the bad, that internal conflict.
Yes. That's what psychologists call attitudinal ambivalence. And specifically, cognitive affective ambivalence is when your thoughts and feelings clash.
Thoughts versus feelings. Example.
McDonald and Zana's research in '98 looked at how students felt about feminists. They found some students were ambivalent, they admired feminist courage, maybe, but disliked what they saw as maybe overly aggressive approaches.
So respect mixed with discomfort.
Yeah.
And does that internal tug of war matter?
It really does. Their follow-up study showed how priming, just briefly showing positive or negative words, could sway ambivalent students' decisions about hiring a feminist candidate.
How so?
If ambivalent students saw a positive prime word first, they were more likely to say they'd hire the feminist. If they saw a negative prime, they were less likely. It suggests when you're internally conflicted, even subtle outside cues can push your judgment one way or the other.
Wow, so being ambivalent makes you more susceptible to subtle nudges. Okay, so if attitudes are this complex, how do we actually measure them? You can't just plug someone in.
No, not quite. It's a challenge. Broadly, we split measures into two types. Explicit, where you directly ask someone, and implicit, which are more indirect.
Okay, explicit first. Asking directly. How does that work?
A very common way is using Likert skills. You give people statements about an attitude object, say euthanasia, and they rate how much they agree or disagree on a scale, usually 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. Strongly disagree to strongly agree.
I think I've filled those out.
Probably. And you might notice some statements are phrased positively, others negatively reverse worded. That's important. It helps catch if someone's just checking boxes without thinking or always agreeing. It keeps them honest, basically.
Makes sense. Any other direct ways?
The semantic differential is another popular one. Instead of agreement, you rate the attitude object on pairs of opposite adjectives. So for euthanasia, again, you might have scales like bad versus good, unethical versus ethical, unnecessary versus necessary, with points in between.
So you're mapping it out based on these word pairs.
Exactly. It captures different shades of meaning, but these direct methods have a big catch.
Which is?
People aren't always honest, or maybe even aware of their true feelings. Social desirability bias is a major issue.
Meaning people give the answer they think they should give.
Precisely. Especially on sensitive topics like prejudice. Someone might hold prejudiced views but won't admit it on a questionnaire because it's socially unacceptable. They give the right answer, not the real one.
Okay, so explicit measures can be skewed. That leads us to the implicit ones, the indirect ways.
Right. Implicit measures try to get around that conscious filtering. One approach is evaluative priming.
Evaluative priming, how does that work?
It's based on the idea that an attitude is like a link in your memory between the object and a feeling positive or negative. The stronger the attitude, the faster that link is activated.
Like a mental shortcut.
Sort of. Think about something you really dislike, maybe Brussels sprouts for some people. The link between Brussels sprouts and yuck is strong and fast. For something you dislike mildly, like maybe plain rice cakes, the link is weaker, slower.
Okay.
Evaluative priming tasks measure these reaction times. They might flash the attitude object, Brussels sprouts, then show a word like disgusting or delicious. If you're faster to categorize disgusting as negative after seeing sprouts, it suggests a strong negative attitude.
So it's measuring the speed of those automatic associations. What about the IAT? I've heard of that one.
Yes, the implicit association test, or IAT, that's another big one. It measures how easily we associate different concepts like, say, different social groups with positive versus negative words. It looks at reaction times when you have to quickly sort items into combined categories. Faster sorting for certain pairings suggests a stronger implicit association.
Digging into those potentially unconscious links. But I gather these implicit measures aren't without controversy either.
You're right, there's ongoing debate. Some researchers question exactly what they measure. Does an IAT score reflect personal attitude or just awareness of cultural stereotypes you don't actually endorse? It's complex.
So still an active area of research.
Very much so. But many believe they offer a valuable window into the more automatic, less controlled aspects of our attitudes, complementing the explicit measures.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what attitudes are, their bits and pieces, their functions, how we measure them. Now, the big one. Do attitudes actually predict behavior? Does what we think or feel actually guide what we do?
Ugh, the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the history here is fascinating. Early on, researchers were pretty pessimistic.
Why is that?
Well, you had studies like Lapierre's back in the 1930s. He traveled the U.S. with a Chinese couple. Anti-Asian prejudice was high then, but they were served almost everywhere they went. Hotels, restaurants.
Okay, so behavior was positive.
Right. But then, Lapierre wrote to all those same places asking if they would serve Chinese guests in theory. The overwhelming response, no.
Whoa, big disconnect.
Huge. And another study by Corey around the same time found basically no link between students' stated attitudes about cheating and whether they actually cheated on a test. So the early signs weren't great.
Made it seem like attitudes were just talk,
Yeah.
but things changed.
Yes, significantly. Later, research got more sophisticated. A big meta-analysis by Krauss in 1995 pulled together results from over 100 studies. He found a much stronger average link, a correlation around 0.38.
Okay, 0.38 isn't perfect, but it's definitely not zero.
Exactly. It shows attitudes do tend to predict behavior, but it's not a simple one-to-one thing. The relationship is complex. It depends on various factors. Maybe the later studies just measured things better or looked at the right conditions.
So what are those conditions? What makes an attitude more likely to line up with action?
One absolutely critical factor is correspondence or compatibility. Meaning the attitude measure needs to match the behavior in specificity. Remember Lapierre, his attitude question was super general. Will you serve members of the Chinese race?
No.
The behavior was specific, serving this particular well-dressed Chinese couple with a professor.
Different levels.
Right. The tacity principle comes in here. The attitude and behavior need to match on target, action, context, and time. If Lapierre had asked, would you serve a well-dressed Chinese couple with an American professor today? The attitude might have predicted the behavior much better. Specificity matters.
Ask a specific question, predict a specific action. Makes sense. What else?
The domain of behavior matters too. The attitude-behavior link is stronger for some things than others.
Like what?
Like your attitude towards a political party is usually a very good predictor of how you'll vote, but your attitude towards donating blood, often a weaker predictor of actually going to donate.
Why the difference?
Well, donating blood involves more hurdles, right? Finding the time, maybe overcoming a fear of needles, practical barriers that a general attitude doesn't fully capture. The difficulty of the action plays a role.
Gotcha. Are there personal differences too? Do some people act more consistently with their attitudes than others?
Definitely. Self-monitoring is a key personality trait here.
Self-monitoring.
Yeah, it's about how much you pay attention to social cues and adjust your behavior to fit in. High self-monitors are like social chameleons. They adapt to the situation. Low self-monitors act more consistently based on their internal feelings and attitudes, regardless of who's watching.
So low self-monitors are more what you see is what you get.
Pretty much, and studies show it, like one by Snyder and Kenzierski on affirmative action. For low self-monitors, their attitudes strongly predicted if they participate in supporting it. For high self-monitors, not so much, they were more swayed by the situation.
Interesting. Any other personal factors?
Well, Krauss's meta-analysis also noted that university students sometimes show weaker attitude-behavior links than non-students.
Really? Why would that be?
One theory is that students' attitudes might just be less developed, less crystallized. They haven't had as much life experience to really solidify their views on everything yet.
Huh. Okay, so it's a mix of the attitude specificity, the behavior itself, and the person involved. Are there models that try to tie all this together?
Yes, there are a couple of really influential ones. Fazio's mode model is one. It stands for motivation and opportunity as determinants. The basic idea is when you have both the motivation and the opportunity to think carefully, your behavior will likely follow from deliberate consideration of your attitudes.
Makes sense. If you have time and care enough, you'll think it through.
Right. But if motivation or opportunity is low, you're rushed, distracted, don't care much, then only your most accessible attitudes, the ones that pop into your head really easily, are likely to guide your more spontaneous actions.
So gut reactions are driven by easily accessible attitudes.
Yeah.
What's the other main model?
The Theory of Planned Behavior by Azin and Fishby. This one's huge. It says the best predictor of your behavior is your intention to perform that behavior.
You're planning to do it.
Exactly. And that intention is shaped by three things. First, your attitude towards the specific behavior, not just the general topic. Second, subjective norms, what you think important people in your life want you to do.
Social pressure, basically.
Yeah, perceived social pressure. And third, perceived behavioral control, how do you believe you can actually do the behavior, your confidence in your ability.
Okay, so my intention to, say, exercise more depends on my attitude about exercising, what my friends' family think, and whether I think I can actually stick to it.
That's the idea. It brings together attitude, social factors, and self-efficacy to predict intention, which then predicts behavior. Very powerful framework.
It really does cover a lot of bases. Now, shifting focus a little, our sources also mentioned attitudes and perceptions in organizations. How does stuff like stereotyping fit in?
Yeah, attitudes are crucial in the workplace. Stereotyping, those generalizations about groups and discrimination, unfair treatment based on group membership are obviously big issues. They heavily influence workplace attitudes and behaviors.
Negatively, I assume.
Definitely. As Okan's work points out, being targeted by discrimination understandably fosters negative attitudes towards the job, the organization, colleagues. It hurts morale, satisfaction, commitment, performance.
And it creates a bad environment overall.
Exactly. It's toxic. And then there's projection.
Projection. Attributing your own stuff to others.
Right. Unconsciously seeing your own feelings, motives, or traits in other people. If you're super competitive, you might assume everyone else is too, even if they're not.
How does that cause problems at work?
It leads to bad assumptions, misunderstandings, mistrust. You might make poor decisions based on faulty reads of people's intentions. It can fuel office politics, undermine teamwork, just generally distort reality.
So these psychological quirks can really mess things up in a professional setting.
Yeah.
Okay, the sources also mention social attitude and adjustment. What's that about?
Social attitude is basically our attitude towards society, people, social issues, norms. Adjustment is our ability to adapt, to cope with changes, navigate social situations, and sort of balance our own desires with what the environment allows or demands.
Kind of like our social function.
Yeah, our ability to fit in and function well within the social world. And it's important because poor social adjustment can lead to things like anxiety, feeling isolated, depression.
And research looks at this.
Yes, studies like Preminics in India have looked at how things like gender or academic path might relate to social adjustment. Ansari's recent work highlights it's complex, influenced by lots of factors.
And this ability to adapt, this adjustment, it connects to leadership too.
Seems so. Carr and Saw found a link between adaptability and effective leadership styles. Leaders who can roll at the punches and adjust tend to do better.
Makes sense.
Okay.
One last area. We know attitudes aren't permanent. They can change. The sources mention a couple of classic theories. Heider's balance theory. Festinger's cognitive dissonance.
Right, two foundational theories on attitude change. Heider's balance theory is about consistency. We like our attitudes to be in harmony.
Harmony.
Yeah. If you like your friend and you like pizza, you feel balanced if your friend also likes pizza. If your friend hates pizza, there's an imbalance, a tension. We're motivated to fix that tension. Maybe decide pizza isn't so great, or your friend's taste isn't perfect.
Striving for psychological consistency and cognitive dissonance.
Festinger's idea. This is about the discomfort we feel when we have conflicting thoughts, or when our behavior clashes with our attitudes. Like, knowing smoking is bad for you, cognition 1, but smoking anyway, cognition 2.
That uncomfortable feeling.
Exactly, that's dissonance. And we're motivated to reduce it. We might change our behavior, quit smoking, change one of the thoughts, downplay the risks it won't happen to me, or add new thoughts to justify it. It helps me relax. It's about restoring internal consistency.
So internal pressure pushes us to align things. Wow. Okay, we have really covered a ton of ground here.
We certainly have, from the basic building blocks, affective, cognitive, behavioral, to why we have attitudes, how they're structured, the challenges in measuring them.
Right. Explicit versus implicit.
And that whole complex dance between attitudes and actual behavior, influenced by correspondence, the situation, the person.
And even how these play out in organizations and our social adjustment. It really gives you, the listener, a much richer lens for looking at your own mind in action.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought for you to chew on. Thinking about everything we've talked about, the components, the functions, ambivalence, the link to behavior, what's one attitude you hold that you're now curious to maybe dissect a bit more?
Yeah, like where did it come from? Is it more feeling or thinking? How strongly does it actually drive what you do?
Maybe tracing its roots, examining its components, noticing its influence. It could be a really insightful bit of self-exploration, something to mull over.